Yes, hello everyone, and thanks for attending the Open Environmental Restoration Resource webinar on the Navy's Quality Document Review Program. My name is Anthony Nelson. Before we get started, I'm going to be your moderator for the day. And before we begin the presentation, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, all participants were going to be muted on entry. Please remain muted during the duration of the webinar. This is a live line, so anybody that unmutes themselves will be heard, as will their background noise. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. That's at the lower right-hand side of your screen. You can choose who to send it to. You can send it to the host if you want to be anonymous, or you can send it to everybody. If you do not see the chat box, take your mouse, hover it in the bottom center of your screen, and a series of circles will pop up. Select the chat icon, and that will turn on the feature. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session, and Ms. Amy Hawkins is going to lead that. Also, this presentation is recorded, and it will be made available after the presentation. We will send out information on where you can find that. When the webinar has ended, you're going to get a short survey pop up. Please take a few moments and fill that out for us if you would. We really rely on this information to make these webinars relevant. Also, if you do not currently receive our T2 email update, you can select to receive that in this short survey. The T2 email update provides current information about Navy programs and announces these OER2 webinars. Lastly, there is a short disclaimer here. The webinar is intended to be informational. It really doesn't indicate an endorsement of a particular product or technology by the Department of Defense or by NAVFAC Expert. We make really every attempt to make these accurate information, but there are no guarantees that any technology or product contained here will be suitable for your site. As always, participation on the webinar is voluntary, of course. Our speaker today, can you advance that, Amy? Our speaker today is Paul Landon. Hopefully he will get on and join us here in just a few moments. He has expertise in solid waste management, landfills, site investigation, remedy evaluation, selection, and he's a technical reviewer for us. He spent 15 years in private industry and joined LANT about 5 years ago. He is a subject matter expert and reviewer for alternative remedy evaluations, technical support, and is currently serving as a project manager on a historical radiologic assessment at HRAs. He participates in the radiologic and optimization work group and has a BS in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. So that's our speaker for the day. I'd like to pass this over now to Bernardi Coughlin from headquarters to give us a short perspective from headquarters on the OER2 webinars. Bernardi?
Thank you, Tony. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And please, because this is live, and I appreciate you being patient as we navigate the technical features of this webinar platform. And I hope everyone stay healthy and safe. And coping well with the quarantine. Certainly, this is unprecedented time that we go through. And it kind of like also show that the webinar series becoming like more and more important in our program as this become our way of sharing the latest and greatest on our policies, guides, lesson learned, so we can all up to speed. And this particular topic, the QDR, or Quality Document Review, is our latest directive. And it's really critical to our program, the Navy Environmental Restoration Program, in particular the installation restoration site, because it is a tool so then we can maintain consistencies and also maintain and improve the quality of our documents, in particular documents that evaluate, assess, select, and potentially modify, or that we have consistency throughout. So this is a very critical tool, and it's applicable to contractors, RPMs, and whoever works in our environmental restoration program. So I'm very excited to share this with everyone, and please don't forget to provide us with feedback at the end of the survey, at the end of the presentation, because that's the only way that we kind of like learn and then know that and maintain that this webinar series to be relevant to our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Landon.
Today's topic is an overview of the Navy's Quality Document Review Program. QDR program was initiated in 2018 by Headquarters Directive and a letter issued in June of 2018. That letter defined the document review process, and in general, the process is intended to ensure programmatic consistency, high quality, and technical validity of documents with a focus on optimization and alignment with Navy policy. The process leverages SMEs across the NAVFAC ER community from all echelons. The QDR process applies to cleanup efforts for documents at active IRP sites. Do note this is for IR, not MR sites. And the general rule for if a document qualifies or not is, this is a very simple question. Does the document evaluate, select, or modify a remedy or path forward? The most popular category of those documents are feasibility studies, proposed plans, RODs, TICRAs, ECAs done through a non-time critical removal action, and maybe the most critical of them all are the 5-year review documents. The process is intended to encourage collaboration and feedback all across the NAVFAC chain of command, if you will, basically from RPMs and their contractors working with the SMEs with support from supervisors and direction from ER managers. There are 2 criteria of documents, Tier 1 criteria and a Tier 2 criteria, that define a little bit more regarding evaluation, modification, or selection of a remedy. The Tier 1 criteria are precedent-setting emergent issues and public regulatory political interest. With respect to precedent setting, what we really mean is a project or an approach that hasn't been done by the Navy before and could set precedents if approved. Also, pump and treat fall into this category, whether it's new or an expansion of one because of the, generally speaking, high capital cost and long-term costs associated with O&M for implementing those. Other precedent setting can be reopening a site, conducting off-base treatment, new or emerging technologies, as I mentioned, new or expansion of a pump and treat system, applying an uncommon cleanup goal, or applying a standard used as an uncommon cleanup goal, implementation of low or potentially unachievable cleanup goals, or red flags in the remedial action objective language. For emerging issues or emerging contaminants, are projects that RPMs may not have specific experience with. Within the QDR, there are SMEs with specific expertise in subject matter that would help provide path forward and make sure that we're in alignment with Navy policy or appropriate regulation as doing so. Things in that category: emerging contaminants, PFAS, acknowledging most of that is on the on the investigation side these days, but we will certainly be headed there as the program matures. Vapor intrusion would be another example, or chemicals that don't have clear risk information or not commonly remediated. And then with the public regulatory political interest are those projects that could create political or regulatory negative attention and essentially draw attention to the Navy. The Tier 2 criteria are large quantities, long time for response to complete, or a total cost to complete over $5 million. With respect to large quantities, that's defined as 1,500 cubic yards of material, applying just to ERM projects, not any overlap with the MILCON project. But with regard to the evaluation, what's being removed, why is it being removed, what are the cleanup goals that are established, are those appropriate? For response complete sites, longer than 20 years, we're basically looking at some of these projects, particularly in 5-year reviews, may not have had proper evaluation, or there's new things to consider of what has developed in the time since the remedy has been implemented, and there may be a more appropriate criteria or better way to evaluate that site for closeout or exit strategy. Do note this doesn't include landfills, which are going to need LTM, or mature sites that are already in the LTM stage, which will essentially by default be captured in the 5-year reviews. And the third category is the cost to complete greater than $5 million, representing a large commitment of capital cost, or large commitment of remedial action operation, O&M, greater than 15 years at $50,000 a year, or we have low concentrations of COCs to deal with for a long time during remedial action operation and O&M. IRP documents specifically meeting these criteria are required to have the QDR unless exempted in coordination with the FEC ER manager and in collaboration with the LANT and PAC ER managers. All other documents will follow the normal optimization review process, such as RAAs, which are a preliminary step in getting to the QDR. So how does the QDR process work? FEC ER managers with input from the RPMs require the document, or are required to put forth the documents for consideration for QDR by basically creating an inventory that's managed, uploaded, and began to look at towards the end of the year with a target of 1 December. From there, the ER managers evaluate the list in coordination with ER managers from echelon 3 and 4 as needed. The LANT and PAC ER managers then assign reviewers and are really responsible for that timely review, logging it, and tracking of the documents input into the system. And to conduct that, myself, there are QDR coordinators. There's 3 of us. I am the coordinator for LANT AOR, and then Jocelyn Tamashiro for PAC, and Arun Gavaskar at XWIC are the equivalent role for assigning and ensuring the QDR reviews. We'll aid in communicating with the RPM and the project team on the status, who's assigned, participate throughout the process if there are any issues. Now, we'll just take a quick look at how the QDR process works with some quick screenshots of NIRIS using the module within NIRIS. So go into NIRIS, use the tools, the little wrench on the left-hand bar, and then slide down to document review. At that point, you'll be able to select under new QDR and provide for uploading the document. Once inside NIRIS, you'll see a screen that looks like this, similar to what an RAA would be for those of you who have done that. We have specific fields, the region, installation, RPM, contractor, description of the site, description of what needs to be done, the type of document, contract, media, what phase the project is in, what the contaminants are, etc. Essentially, should be pretty self-explanatory at this point. They want to populate the fields, attach the supporting documents, and hit submit. And do note that this process can be done by either the RPM or the contractor. So just completed reviewing how to upload a document within NIRIS. That notification will send a notification to, regardless of if it's NAVFAC, AOR, the notification is sent to all of the QDR coordinators so that we can fill in for each other and overlap when needed to help get the assignment out. Once it's in NIRIS, this next screenshot is just a how a site looks and what we see in NIRIS, and then we'll identify the RPM, the contractor, the basics that had been input on the last screen, and provide the location where the posted documents are available for the QDR coordinators and the SME reviewers to pick the documents up, download for review. This is where comments are posted after they're completed, where comments can be added throughout the process. Response to comments will go back in here. And as the documents are loaded, as comments are made, as comments posted and response to comments are posted, each of the document reviewers automatically receives a notification from this, essentially when action is taken on this screen. So we're all notified and ready to take action when notified by NIRIS that something has changed for a specific QDR tracked by a number. In this case, this was 4251, but each QDR will have a number for us to track inside NIRIS. So as I have mentioned, that can be completed by the RPM or the contractor to upload. And one thing to stress in this first bullet here is the internal draft, getting that document in for review. We really want this process to take place at the internal draft phase, which can provide and does provide, as we'll talk about a little bit more in the schedule or in the turnaround time. But the process really works best as intended if we can pick it up at the internal draft phase of the document before it's been released to regulators, stakeholders, et cetera. Because once the document is loaded, as I demonstrated in the last few slides, that notification occurs automatically to the QDR coordinators. At that point, we retrieve the document, go back to the spreadsheet that is prepared in support of FEC ER managers, up to PAC and LANT ER managers, and we look at the assigned reviewers for that installation and for that document and reach out to the SMEs. Each of the reviews regarding the SMEs has two reviewers, primary and secondary. Both are equal in review, but the terminology there and how the process works. The primary reviewer combines the comments from both reviewers, works with the secondary reviewer if there's any conflicting comments or one that wouldn't be understood or should be clarified before submitting. So the primary is responsible for combining them prior to submitting the comments on each QDR. Now, at that point, the SMEs have 14 days turnaround time to review it. The RPM and contractor, 30 days to respond. at that point and as part of the process, response to comments are required. Comments need to be worked out, agreed upon. The next slides talk a little bit about some steps in there, but the process really depends upon responses to comments and adjudicating those comments for agreement. And the review, as I mentioned in the first slide, is really focused on Navy policies, CERCLA, or other regulatory requirements that may be appropriate, as well as considering optimization opportunities are the focus of the review. 14 days is a target and generally can be met. There are issues, whether it's staffing or whether it's a complex document, that the SMEs will raise a little white flag. We'll coordinate that with the RPM, ask for an extension, or perhaps if it was a conflict on behalf of TDY or leave or something, conflicted with one of the SMEs, an alternate SME might be assigned to help that. But, just note that we do target the 14 days, but sometimes it needs to be longer given individual document circumstances. Next slide is just some details about how comments are assigned. And in the next few slides, there's an example of what this looks like. But there are categories assigned essentially relative to the content of the basis for the comment. C is a critical comment, essentially a contentious issue. Will cause SME non-concurrence if resolution can't be addressed by the team. Major is defined as incorrect material. Substantive is just factually incorrect material. And administrative, the least type, are essentially grammar, punctuation, things like that. Obviously, there's some level of judgment in the reviewers in assigning a critical, a major, a substantive, CM or S to the comments, but essentially just think of them as the critical one is the most important, then an M, then an S in resolving the comments. But both critical and major will require a revision or some discussion with the project team. When those comments are provided back on the form, as we'll see in the next slide, the SME may provide rationale for the comment, such as Navy guidance, policy, EPA regulation, DOD, et cetera, providing the background and basis for why that comment's being made. When you receive the comments, the directions on how to prepare responses are on page 1 of that document that you'll receive with the comments. And then during the adjudication process, when the RPM and the project team are responding, then the decision matrix in the form, accept basically is acknowledge, accept, we incorporate it. Reject means that the team takes exception, which is fine, but you need to provide rationale for doing so and why the comment, these sometimes reviewers miss a piece of background information, don't understand it. It would just take a simple explanation as to inform why that comment has been rejected. And then M essentially stands for modification, is accept with modification. Should also provide rationale when using the accept or the M response. As I mentioned before, response to comments are required to send them back to the SMEs for review and accept. At that point, the QDR process is essentially complete. If there is a disagreement or disagreements over the comments, we can elevate collectively. The RPM can elevate it through the ER manager to provide justification to the PAC ER manager, at which point the elevated issue will get resolved to reach an agreeable outcome. A specific example, one of the things that the process and the QDR review is intended to do is ensure consistency among the documents across, the ER program or the IRP sites within the ER program. An example of one thing that happened relative early on within the QDR process is within the SMEs, we had conflicting or variations in the way that protectiveness statements were being addressed for PFAS sites in 5-year reviews. So the inconsistencies and comments from the SMEs led to a collaboration to ensure that PFAS sites were being looked at with respect to providing the consistency statements or consistent in the protectiveness statements within the 5-year reviews. And that was accomplished by SMEs working with ER managers and headquarters in the development of slides with the SMEs, and then those slides were used to provide direction on how the PFAS protectiveness statement should be addressed in 5-year reviews, thereby ensuring consistency all across the Navy sites. This slide is just an example of what the comment form looks like, what you will see. This would be page 2. The first page is the directions of how to respond. But quickly going through what these are, the first few columns are just simply the number. The source is the initials of the SME who reviewed it. The type, substantial, major, that's where the type a few slides ago goes in. And then the page and section number for easy reference within the document. And just some comments, randomly pulled out with rationale. In this case, 2 of them were clarification and 2 of them were related to 5-year review. As example of comments that were made, the first comment, the document had been written such that, or the document was written such that it wasn't coming from the Navy as reporting on its own sites. So the comment was to revise the document with the Navy as the author, taking responsibility and accepting that 5-year review, just for conciseness, clarification of who owns it. The second comment is really just about protectiveness statements with regard to land use control inspections that are done throughout the 5-year review process or within the 5-year review process. And, because a sign is missing or because a lock is missing doesn't necessarily mean that the remedy is not protective, because that is easily remedied and should be remedied before the 5-year review is completed. The next 2 comments, or the third one down, is also about land use controls and how that might affect protectiveness within the 5-year review. And the fourth example here was about how interviews were conducted during the 5-year review process. Typical things that will be looked for as an example for early on evaluation of remedy for an eco rod. Things are the remedial action objectives achievable? Do the alternatives selected, are they able to meet the REOs? How do they meet the REOs? And then obviously for 5-year reviews, the evaluation of the remedy, how the protectiveness statements are carried forward. Communication is really key within the process. Oftentimes SMEs, or ideally SMEs, have some site background, but oftentimes SMEs don't have any real background in the site. So having a brief teleconference at the onset of the review to provide some helpful background information, understand time constraints or limitations on what needs to be done as a result of contracting issues, or background on regulatory or stakeholder trustee consideration might affect how we've gotten here. Things like that will be very helpful or could be very helpful for the SMEs in understanding background on the document. So a teleconference at the onset or at the completion to resolve comments and responses is recommended and can be very helpful for the whole project team. All right, that's a general overview of the QDR process and how it works. Now, I have 2 slides of knowledge checks, and so the way this will work, you're just going to jot these down, and the next slide will have the answers, and then we'll do that again. So first question under knowledge check is, does an RAA need to be considered for QDR? Yes or no? Second question, the QDR process applies to documents for IRP sites that blank, blank, or blank a remedy. Third question, true or false? Preparation of response to comments from SME is optional in the QDR process. Next slide, and the very difficult answers. RAAs do not require QDR. That is essentially the first step in the remedy evaluation process, and that's just looking at the alternatives as an initial optimization step regarding preparation of the ECA or FS, CMS, etc. That second document that the RAA supports will likely be subject to QDR. The QDR process applies to documents that evaluate, modify, or select a remedy. Probably the easiest, in the time that we've been doing QDR, the simplest way to remember if it applies or not. It can be under the criteria, but generally speaking, it does apply if the document evaluates, modifies, or selects a remedy. And preparation of response to comments is optional. That's false. The process does depend and rely upon adjudication of comments received during the QDR review. Last question. A proposed plan has gone through QDR review prior to submitting to the regulators, the stakeholders, etc. Based upon those comments, the comments received would modify the remedy or approach or require a change in what was commented upon by the SMEs during the QDR. What should you do? A, nothing, proceed forward and finalize it. B, contact the QDR coordinators and SMEs for an opportunity to review the proposed changes. Correct answer is B. Bring those changes back, likely, and I think it would be an extreme event where the changes are major, but you should provide an opportunity for the SMEs to review those comments and make sure that they're still in line with the SME's perspective, Navy policy, guidance, etc. With that, just a few slides on questions. And the points of contact, as I mentioned earlier, myself at NAVFAC Atlantic, Jocelyn Tamashiro at PAC, and Arun Gavaskar at XWIC.
Thank you, Paul. We did have several questions come in. Are you prepared to answer a few questions for us?
I'll do my best.
All right. The first one is, my project has already been part of an optimization review. Do I still need a QDR?
Good question. The answer to that is yes. However, as long as the key there would be understanding who the SME in part of the optimization process review was. And for consistency, we would make at least one of the reviewers be one of the SME who was part of the optimization process to provide for consistency and make sure that the SME reviewers are taking into account the optimization process and, in theory, speed everything up along the way from having that consistency.
All right, thank you. The second question is, can a contractor submit a QDR request in NIRIS?
Yes, as long as they have access to NIRIS.
And then that just plays right into our third question, because the third question that came in is, if NIRIS is down or I'm having access issues to load the QDR, what can I do?
Very simply, notify one or all of the QDR coordinators by email, and if the files are too big to transfer by email, we can use DoD Safe or some other form of file transfer, and we'll work at that point, outside of NIRIS to coordinate with the SMEs and catch back up with NIRIS when it's available. So no problem on NIRIS if there's an issue in getting into there.
Okay. And the final question that we have is, my schedule is critical to submit the document to regulators. Can a QDR be expedited? Yes,
it can. Keep in mind that all of the 2 weeks is essentially already an expedited schedule, but a request can be made. As much advance notification that it's coming would be helpful, rather than, here's my QDR, can you expedite it? We'll still accommodate that to the extent practical, but ideally, if one is coming and it needs to be expedited, any advance notice is helpful in coordinating with the SMEs.
All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights into this process today.